Okay. Clearly, you can see I have not done the Zoom admin piece of this before. Okay. Can I screen share? Yes. Here we go. Cool. So, welcome. Here's the slide to point out that we're recording. This is the Gardening Club. It meets once a month. It's a way for open source developers working on Zcash related projects to connect to each other. So let's dive in. So the typical agenda looks like this. Welcome. There's some announcements I'll give, and then we hear from different projects. And then after that sort of project presentation phase, we stop recording and then have kind of an open-ended discussion. So if you want to participate in those discussions, you got to show up to the meetings. So let's dive in. So a few announcements from the Zcash world. The Unstoppable wallet has launched with Zcash shielded support, and this is exciting because it's the first multi-currency wallet that supports Zcash shielded. And now there's a few mobile wallet options on Android and iOS. This list, there's also Zec Wallet Lite, I'm pretty sure that works on iOS and I think Android. So there's more and more options showing up, and that's really exciting for shielded adoption. The next bit of news is that the first Gitcoin grants round that was focused on Zcash completed. And so there were 10 projects that received funding, and that's really cool because it's so far funding in the Zcash ecosystem has been through big bodies like ECC or the Zcash Foundation that either ECC works with partners or the Zcash Foundation has a grant system that receives applications, and then they make decisions about how to allocate those grants. Gitcoin's a little bit different because the funding gets distributed by kind of from the ground up based on what any user who's joining Gitcoin finds valuable. So I'm really excited to see that we have multiple kinds of funding happening in Zcash, each with different sort of dynamics and decision making, and I think that's great for the ecosystem. And then speaking of funding, the really big funding organ is currently called MGRC, that's Major Grants Review Committee. They got organized over the past couple of months, but they are going to begin receiving grant applications on December 7th, and they'll have like a new name, I believe a website, and like a grant application portal. And this is really exciting, partially because they will be receiving a lot of Zcash issuance from block rewards. So the amount of funding available will be large, and it will be going to applicants who are not ECC or the Zcash Foundation. So if you have a big project or anything that you want to create a grant for, keep an eye out for that, as well as the potential for future Gitcoin rounds. So those are the recent announcements. And then diving in, here we have an empty slide because I apologize, but I didn't get the speakers into the slide yet. So anyone available to jump in to present about their project?
I don't see homes yet in the list.
Okay. If we don't have any anyone who wants to present, we could just have open-ended discussion. It might be.
Have we pinged homes to in case he just?
I will. I'll do it
when
right
it
now.
was.
Yep.
I'll ping him right now.
I could also glance at participants and ask folks. I can call on people and see if they have any updates they want to share. Should we try that? Like I noticed Aditya from, is it Nighthawk?
Yes,
Are you interested in Can I put you on the spot to just give like a 2-minute update? Anything new or exciting with Nighthawk?
Yeah, sure. So we did launch in the App Store finally. It's a kind of a soft launch, but a big launch because it coincided with Zcash's Canopy upgrade. And we've been getting a lot of feedback privately from the users, how they're finding the app, any issues that they're having. So it's been more of a focus on debugging issues for them, and then also planning out the fixes and upgrades that we plan to do over the next few weeks and months. And as for the Gitcoin grant, we did receive that too. So thanks for the community and everyone who donated. We will be evaluating the progress of the SDK. So Flexstar SDK is still not available as such. It's still in development. So as and when it will be available, I'll be reviewing it and seeing if it's fit and meets all our criteria, and then integrating that. Worst case scenario, we'll use the funds for furthering the development and support of the infrastructure for the Nighthawk if we are not able to get the Span SDK integrated, but we hope we can deliver on our promises. That is it really from our end. Otherwise, all good growth in the Z2Z space, more shielded transactions happening. So
Great, thanks. Actually, I have a question about another thing. Can you describe the zip about changing shielded transaction fees to folks who might not know about that, and sort of describe the status of it?
Yeah, sure. So that's been going on since the last month or two. I've proposed a zip to reduce the transaction fees by 10x, because there's still of times that this fee topic comes in place whenever user is transacting on Z2Z transactions. It's around 10,000 ZAT for now, which is kind of higher compared to other cryptocurrencies, which has lower than 1,000 Satoshis or ZATs or whatever they have equivalent in their currency. And it just removes a bit of friction. So you even consider less of a consideration for fee. For example, like for Z2Z transactions, just memos, you have to send the fee and an amount which is lower. So your fee becomes a factor that you deal with. And knowing that Zcash still has a lot of mining rewards being given out, the fees is still not a big factor in presently. So as like a boost to the users and to remove the fear of any fee alarm going off. I know in regular Z2Z Zcash users, we don't think about it at all. But for new users, for the education, they really consider, like even though if it's negligible, about a couple of cents, it is what they focus on. That, okay, so this is what it's going to cost. So this is the zip that really answers to making it extremely cheap, as long as we can support it, along with some caveats of really making some progress over scaling and handling scenarios of any excess transactions been happening on the blocks, or any scaled upgrades that we want to do in the future, taking learnings from Ethereum or other chains that have some progress. So as for the progress on the zip itself, it is well appreciated by the apps and developers in the Zcash ecosystem for now. And we actually got it included as part of the Zcash D protocol upgrade. I mean, the upgrades that will come out in the software in the next iteration. And I believe the Zec wallet suite of apps will be the first to boot it up as per the activation schedule in a couple of weeks. So I think before the end of this year, we'll be having the 1,000 ZAT fee activated on the Zcash network. So that's something I'm excited to look forward to.
Yeah, as zip editor, I'm in the middle of a review, but it looks fine. The only major issue I found was that we probably want to change the fee to that for all transactions, not just for Z2Z.
So that, I believe, will be a big ask, because I was trying to keep it isolated to Z2Z transactions, because as we know, the T addresses, a lot of different clients are using it in a customized way. And
well, I mean, so Zcash D itself can easily follow that. because we've had a ticket open to equalize the fees between Z to Z. I mean, so currently, if you use any of the Z underscore APIs, then it will use that standard fee. It's just the legacy APIs that don't use it. So even if you send a T to T transaction using the Z APIs, which is quite possible, then it will use the standard fee. So it's kind of inconsistent at the moment. So that's why I wanted to.
Oh yeah, you're right. Actually, it's very inconsistent, and that is one fear I had, that if that's going to cause friction and delay the whole process to even change the fee for Z to Z, that is why I kept it limited to Z to Z. But if you strongly believe that,
yeah, there's no resistance on ECC's part to changing Zcash D, and I can't.
So that's good to hear. That's great to hear. So if there's a thumbs up from the ECC, and we have the Zcash D change being done, then I believe it will be the requirement for the other implementations and exchanges to really update and match up. And even I believe the Ledger and Trezor teams.
Yeah.
So do you believe that can still fall into the same activation timeline in a couple of weeks, or will that need a separate?
I mean, so it doesn't have to be the case that everyone activates at the same time. It's slightly better for privacy if they do, but it's not absolutely necessary. So we can just publish it and wait for them to catch up, I think.
Right. I also suspect there's kind of an interesting thing going on here where some parts of our ecosystem are very engaged and responsive, especially shielded wallet developers, because they're working on new products or new features in existing products that are using recent technology and code for Zcash, whereas some other ecosystem partners just like reuse Bitcoin libraries and don't put too much effort into supporting Zcash because they have multi-currency applications. And so I think we'll probably see a spectrum of responsiveness. And so I expect kind of a long tail with a lot of the T-Otter support. It'll be interesting to see if we change the Zcash D default, how much impact that has.
And it's not a consensus change. I mean, you can still use any fee you want, and you will be able to do that even in Zcash D because there's a configuration option for it. So it's just the default that's changing.
Okay, no, I take the point, and let's have that conversation on the zip itself.
Yes. Yeah, I apologize for not having been very responsive on the zip ticket. I will try and get to that today.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Does anyone else want to jump in and give a status update about any projects? What about from like ECC, maybe from our wallet team or the protocol team? I think we have some status updates we could give that would be interesting.
Well, I've been doing some interesting work on optimizations for the pasta curves that we're going to use so probably in the next protocol upgrade, but in the Pollard shielded protocol. So there's an optimization you can do to the when you're calculating square roots, which is necessary for point decompression, and it saves roughly 50% of the time to take a square root. So that's interesting.
Cool. Can you give a like one sentence summary of what Pollard is?
So Pollard is we're proposing to change the shielded protocol, or to create a new version of the shielded protocol based fairly closely on sapling, but using the Halo 2 proving system. So Halo 2 is a proving system that supports recursion. So that will be useful for scaling later on. And it only depends on discrete log and not pairings, and it doesn't have a trusted setup. So that will make it easier to change the circuit.
Cool, thanks. Any other status updates? Any volunteers? So one topic I was interested in that seemed to follow on to the zip about transaction fees was how we might want to change transaction fees and Zcash moving forward, especially when we're thinking about privacy or scalability. And one kind of change I'm personally interested in and motivated by is Ethereum's EIP 1559. So I can describe that a little bit, and then I'm curious, especially from people working on wallets, how they feel about that. So my understanding of EIP 1559 is that it will change Ethereum from kind of having a fixed limit in block capacity, and then sort of an open auction for fees where users submit transactions, they offer to pay a maximum amount of gas and then more or less for the gas to compute their transaction. And then, sorry, this is the current design. So then miners try to pick from those transactions which they think would pay them the most Ethereum versus how much computational cost it requires to validate the transaction. And an issue with that is that users who are deciding that they want their transaction confirmed more urgently need to figure out, well, how much should they be paying for gas? But to know that, they kind of have to know how much everyone else will be paying. So it's sort of a it's a kind of game where you're trying to predict everyone's moves ahead of time. And if you make an error by picking a price that's too high, you're sort of wasting funds by spending too much on fees. And if you if you have an error in the other way where you pay something too low, your transaction won't confirm as quickly as you may have needed. And there's no clear good solution on how to pick those fees. So the change EIP 1559 introduces, establishes a kind of common fee that everyone observing the network knows about, and it can scale up or down based on how much usage there is. So over longer time windows, it can guarantee that on average blocks have a certain size or lower. But in the short term, there may be some larger blocks. And this is kind of appealing from like a capacity perspective, because I think with cryptocurrencies, there can often be cases where, especially in the past, like with Bitcoin, there would be cases where there's not too much activity and many people tend to be holding the asset. And then suddenly the price starts going up rapidly or down rapidly, or there's any other kind of event that many people care about. And so all around the same time, they want to transfer their funds. So then there's this huge spike in demand. And with Bitcoin or the current design of Ethereum, that hits this limit, and then people have submitted transactions that need to sit around for an unknown amount of time, and there's different ways to deal with that, but they're all a bit cumbersome. Zcash is currently similar, except there's one interesting difference where we've introduced a sort of a validity limit. So you can say, if this transaction gets mined within the next 30 minutes, that's good. If it doesn't, then it can never be mined. And providing that certainty actually can help in this sort of scenario. But nevertheless, all three of these systems currently have this issue where if there's a spike, there's this really annoying behavior for users. They don't know how long their transactions take to confirm. Nobody knows exactly what to do for fees because everyone's guessing what everyone else will do. So fees tend to spike up or do wild things. And then in the meantime, when there isn't a spike of demand, if demand is lower than the block capacity, there's kind of a wasted resource. So again, circling back to EIP 1559, the goal is to have a known price that users and wallet vendors and everyone knows. And if demand is low, like in a period when there's not a spike and blocks tend to not be full, that price keeps decaying downward. And so eventually we would imagine if transaction fees start getting close to zero, it's going to enable more use cases of cheap transactions. And so over time, we might expect the blocks to begin filling up again. But once they begin reaching a threshold with EIP 1559, the transaction fees start growing back up. And if there is a spike that's short enough term, it's okay with this design because you can have some larger blocks for a temporary amount of time. And as long as the average block size over a long enough window is below a threshold, it's still relatively safe and convenient, for example, for full nodes to sync to the network or for miners to validate blocks. So that's that's like a general description of what that design intends to do. I'm really curious, just based on that general description, what wallet or app creators think of that kind of design. Are there pros or cons? I tend to like it, but I'm keeping my eye out for examples where it might be bad for use cases that I'm not aware of. Does anyone want to share?
I mean, I have opinions, but I will wait for wallet and app developers to weigh in first.
So I did review the zip that was also brought in to my attention from Nathan. And initially I thought it was so customized and specific to Ethereum. I myself have had issues with fees on Ethereum. I've paid hundreds of dollars this year for fees for transactions that ended up failing, but the fees were still collected by the miners. So I don't still have a full grasp on the complexity of how Ethereum transactions and the smart contracts work. But I get the idea that they are trying to really accommodate the transaction spikes that happen. So I just wish if someone has like the bandwidth or time to maybe simulate how a transaction spike would affect Zcash with its current params for handling the traffic and the block size today. And then based on those simulations, then review competing solutions.
Yeah, that's a good idea to sort of predict what that might look like on Zcash without any change, to inform any changes we would want to make to how fees work. I noticed.
So I guess I will express my opinion. So I think of fees as primarily being to incentivize miners to include transactions at all. So a fee needs to cover the cost and the computational cost and the bandwidth cost of a miner including a transaction. And that's basically all. It doesn't have to be any higher than that. Because fees are not really a good mechanism for doing denial of service control, so or congestion control. And I think, yeah, as Aditya says, that EIP is somewhat specific to Ethereum circumstances.
Yeah, so a couple of differences. One is the base fee in EIP 1559 is that's that fee that will ratchet up or down depending on network utilization. Let's just call it generically. That fee in the Ethereum world, because supply integrity is not as big an issue, that fee is burnt. right? So which provides an economic benefit. So there's an economic benefit to all ETH holders in that model that
well,
we couldn't.
it's not supply integrity. It's that they don't care as much as about having a fixed, predictable supply.
Right. True. Okay. Wrong choice of words. But at any rate, that also makes it less gameable, right? Because the base fee's burned, it doesn't go to a miner, for example. That part doesn't. The tip that Nathan mentioned, where you can say, "Wow, I really need to get this through." So in addition to the base fee, I'm going to add an incremental fee on top. That does go to miners in the Ethereum world. Yeah, so a couple of differences, Ethereum versus our use, but I think conceptually there's some potential there for sure. The one thing it does, if I understand it correctly, is there's also a scalability UX implication that would be kind of nice, right? So when we hit the point, or if we approach the point of saturation on Zcash before we have the scalability solution in place that we need, then that experience would be managed a little better by this type of fee structure versus things just all of a sudden start failing. So the UX, I think, might be a little softer in that regard.
I noticed Holmes jumped in.
Holmes made it,
we're
right?
talking about EIP 1559, but also if you had any like status updates or you wanted to share anything about any projects, feel free to do that too.
Sorry, I keep striking out on this call. I'm cursed. There was a calendar invite that I had that where the link wasn't working, and I was kind of on hold for a bit.
Oh, sorry about that.
But no, it's totally fine. I am embarrassed to be late, but I think so. I did have a few slides ready. I could talk a little bit about stuff we've been working on Zbay. But I could also just fit right into this discussion and kind of, I mean, my question's about, I'm curious what other approaches there are to dealing with the problem of what happens when there isn't space in blocks anymore, and if the fee mechanism isn't an ideal approach, or what the alternatives are.
I mean, one alternative is to try and accelerate the schedule for scaling, and so that would allow transaction aggregation, so that basically the main cost for miners is just the number of aggregates rather than the number of transactions. So that's a more fundamental solution to the problem. There might still be some per transaction cost depending on how we do it, but it will be much smaller.
Does your team have a sense of the risk, or like the amount of work and the risk of making estimates around that work to address scalability and
so this is one of the reasons why we're doing Pollard as the first step. So that is switching something very similar to the sapling circuit to this new proving system that supports recursion, but not doing anything else. So we're not actually making use of recursion in Pollard, but laying the groundwork to do that. And that, I think, spreads out the engineering risk, so we can, and spreads out the load on ECC's design efforts and auditing efforts.
Did that answer your question?
Are there models?
Holmes?
I know it. Yeah, it sounds like that means that when that work is done and released, you will have a clearer sense of what work is remaining. There will be less risk attached to that estimate. But yes, but also that piece is unknown. And then are there models of, I mean, I think that probably most folks building wallets want to know that they're not going to sort of break overnight when they get popular. But I also think that it could be that we're far enough from that now that it isn't a worry. So I don't know. it just seems like a tricky strategic question. I mean, I think the hard part is that, let's see, I guess the hard part is that knowing that everything could stop working at some point might be deterring people from investing in the ecosystem, or might make people worried or drive people away at some point.
Right.
Or if that happens some brief period of time, it could have that effect. I guess that's the risk, that's the exposure on that side. So, I mean, maybe another question is, how quickly could this sort of stopgap mechanism of EIP 1559 be implemented if it had to be implemented in a hurry as a solution to that, to block size, or to blocks being full? Does that make sense? Also, please, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to speak to this stuff, but I'm just kind of running through it.
No, these are great questions.
I mean, it is possible to do an emergency network upgrade if the situation was urgent enough, but I think we would probably want to just keep things to the scheduled upgrades. And there's a lot proposed already in NU5, which is probably the upgrade that Pallard will go into, although that's not certain yet. And so NU5 will be scheduled for May, June 2021, and the next upgrade after that will probably be, I don't know, October 2021.
Yep.
So those are the main opportunities for changing things, either for scalability or for fee structure.
So yeah, I wanted to kind of pop up a level to respond to some of the concerns you brought up, Holmes. So in my thinking, and I would love to know if people have other ways to think about this, but there are two potential problems in capacity of the network. Two different kinds of scenarios. So one is like a spike in usage because of some event, and that could include like a denial of service attack, for example, or it could just be everybody wants to send Zcash on the same day suddenly for some reason, and it's for some transient reason, like there's an event, but like a week later, people will want to mostly hold Zcash or whatever. And then, so that's sort of one dynamic. And then another kind of dynamic is just the good kind. There's like just constant organic growth of a network effect, and more users more and more often want to send transactions. And so I think we, for the first kind, for the spikes, I think the best possible thing, I think even with a highly scaled architecture, there can still be these spikes. And so the best thing the platform can do for users is make it easiest to, as easy as possible to sort of understand what that is, what the implications to them are, and maybe have some idea of how long that might persist. So for example, if an ideal thing, in my opinion, would be you have a wallet and it has like a little yellow alert thing that says, oh, there's network congestion, so confirmation times take twice as long and or fees are this high, you know, and maybe that will last a day or something. That might be something ideal that can, I don't know if that's possible, but that might be an ideal UX for addressing this scenario that I think is always going to be unavoidable.
I don't agree that it's always unavoidable, because if you think about how transaction aggregation works, you will have some set of aggregators, which could include things like exchanges or what providers or whatever, that are doing some processing to combine transactions together. So they're not trusted for privacy. And So your load on the main blockchain is essentially dependent on the number of those aggregators, which is not going to suddenly spike.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. I mean, I could see maybe that layer itself could also spike. But anyway, I think my main thinking here is, at least in the short term, that's a possibility. And in my opinion, the best solution to it is having a good UX that, and for me, a good UX would be users can, if possible, the technology can reduce uncertainty. And there's examples of how we can do that in certain ways. So for example, Zcash has transaction expiry, which helps reduce uncertainty, because if there's a spike, you know if your transaction did not get confirmed within about 30 minutes or whatever your wallet has done for you, then it definitely failed. Whereas in Bitcoin, you never know if it will fail or not. And so that uncertainty leads to more problems, right? And another kind of uncertainty we might be able to address would be, what are fees now? How bad could they get in an hour? Or things of that nature, maybe. So that's all the category of handling spikes in demand. The category of handling organic growth, I think, is really important to have our eye on, and that's why ECC has been prioritizing scalability research for a couple of years now. And it's because once that growth begins, there may not be that much time to deploy a solution that can sort of meet the pace of the growth. And so there's a couple of scenarios to break down there. So if we look at like Bitcoin as an early example of how things might go poorly, what happened was there was this growth before blocks were getting full, and then different people disagreed about how to respond to that. And that uncertainty about the future plan, regardless of designs or implementations, that uncertainty about the future plan began impacting different like businesses or users who had built products or had plans that sort of naively assumed, you know, fees would stay low or so forth. And so I think what we saw was there was that disagreement. It led to like the chain split with Bitcoin Cash, and the Bitcoin network didn't really adopt any like substantial capacity improvements. They worked on SegWit, which was like a very modest capacity improvement, and then they've relied sort of on the fee market to sort things out. And Bitcoin is still thriving and operating today, but I definitely believe there were many use cases and users who realized, oh, I wanted to do a particular kind of thing, and that's just not possible on Bitcoin. And so now I need to find something else that can do that.
I mean, if anything, I think you're being too generous here. Bitcoin entirely failed as a means of payment as opposed to a store of value.
Well,
as a result of this issue.
Right, but it's also a matter of different people who were involved just had different expectations about what Bitcoin could be or should be, and nobody realized that they had the different expectations until it came down to the wire, and that
but I mean,
always happens.
It could have satisfied both use cases if this had been addressed earlier.
Maybe. I mean, so I think for Zcash, it's definitely different because right now it's a more tight-knit community. We have kind of this explicit governance, and we also have this sort of community expectation or community value of continual change or improvement, as long as we're maintaining some key invariants. So people are used to the idea of, oh, there's a new kind of transaction, there's new address formats, things get deprecated. You know, Zcash users are a bit more used to that kind of stuff. So Zcash has this opportunity, and I think there's the most important thing, if we all agree on it, would be, yes, we all agree that scalability is important, although we might not know the timelines, we might not know which designs, etc. But if it's kind of the common community consensus that it is important, then even if we're late or the design is infeasible or something, and there is organic growth that hits a ceiling, it's still going to be a slightly different scenario if people know, like my use case is being inhibited by capacity constraints now, but the whole community is working on fixing that, versus my use case is hitting a constraint and the different people want to do different things and there's disagreement and nobody knows what's going to happen. That kind of uncertainty we can definitely address.
Scalability is never really an issue until it's an issue, right?
Right,
like
right.
Ethereum. We didn't know until they started, playing that game with the, what was it, with those pets.
CryptoKitties.
And and all of a sudden we saw a scalability issue. But until something like that happens, there's really no issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's something we want to have sorted out ahead of time. And I think back to what Holmes was bringing up, it was sort of like, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, one of the requests for information or concerns I heard was, have we sort of planned out, like, do we have a capacity plan so we know if we start seeing this amount of growth, we know how much time we have before we need to make a change, or things of that nature. And I don't think we have a solid like model for that yet.
We don't.
I'm part of a sister project to Zcash.
Mm-hmm.
We're a fork of you. We're called Pirate Chain.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm one of the commanders over there. So I love the work you guys do, man. I can't wait for Halo 2.
Great.
I can't wait to never have to debate about a trusted setup again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked at Pirate Chain too closely, but have you turned off T-adders, transparent addresses?
Yep.
Right.
It's sapling only.
That's interesting. So
I think this is an excellent approach, and I wish we could do it actually, but we can't for various business and
I understand
reasons. But in terms of timeline, so as I said, it's likely that we will deploy Halo 2 in NU5. Again, that's not guaranteed at all. And in that case, since NU6 will be basically only a few months after NU5, since it will have to be in 2021, that means that the next opportunity to make a major scaling change will be in 2022. So it's a matter of so how much adoption we get before then. I think that if we have full blocks, then I mean, it'd be slightly painful, but we can weather that. Perfectly practical to weather it.
I think one of the best ways for you guys to flip the script to something even more private is just to make your wallets work in a fashion that it uses shielded addresses by default instead of the other way around, right? So instead of having to check that box to shield the addresses, let it do it on its own. And if you want to make it transparent, you could do that.
I mean, that is what the Zcash, what the Zec wallet does. Sorry, the ZECC wallet, which is the internal thing that we use, which Nighthawk is based on.
And Unstoppable as well, the SDKs.
Exactly. So that's a model where you hold your funds in shielded addresses, and if you need to transact with someone who only has a T address, you unshield only at that point.
Can I jump in? Because I see we're coming up on the end of the hour, and so I sort of wanted to conclude this this piece about scalability, and then if Holmes wanted to give an update about Zbay, I was really curious about that. Yeah, so just kind of to wrap things up, I think a lot of us believe scalability is super important, and knowing that it's a goal is important to help grow the ecosystem and help people plan their products, projects, and businesses based on that goal. And we've talked a little bit about timelines. So, for example, Dara was just talking about sort of the minimum bounds of how quickly we could deploy something if we had a really good design already, and that would be 2022. So that's an interesting bound. And then the other piece that
so I was including the time to design something.
Oh, awesome, good. The other piece we talked about where I feel like we could improve would be some sort of so capacity planning, like there's an easy part, which is just to write down what's the maximum like transaction throughput of the protocol. But then there's the harder part of sort of like predicting what growth might be. And the one thought I wanted to leave there before we switch off this topic is that a lot of people just think of an S-curve. And if you look at like what like Bitcoin block sizes did, it looks kind of like that. But I think we should be we should anticipate in the cryptocurrency community that there could be shifts of users from one system to another, and that would not look like a sort of a typical S-curve necessarily. There could be like an event where suddenly, 50% of the users of system X are like, well, actually system Y is working better, and there's some event that convinces us of that, so we're all going to shift at once. So the sooner we could have a good scalability solution in place, the better for being ready for adoption of that sort. Anyway, let's wrap that up and hand it over to Holmes to talk about Zbay.
Awesome, cool. I'm just going to share my screen really quick, and I'll try to get through these fairly quickly. Share, and you can see my desktop. Should be a keynote slide and a Zbay.
Yes, we see it.
Great. Cool. So I just wanted to give an update on what we've been working on lately, which is pretty much just trying to make Zbay fast. The goal to kind of create context.
Can you just introduce what Zbay is, just in case it's
sure.
new?
Yeah. So for everyone who hasn't seen Zbay yet, Zbay is a Zcash wallet, right now a light wallet that lets you send and receive money, but also lets you send and receive messages using encrypted memos, and also lets you register human readable usernames using encrypted memos sent to a shared address.
So by the way, Holmes, you're sharing your whole screen, not just the presentation window. In case you didn't intend to.
So I am sharing, there should be one desktop shared with Keynote and Zbay.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
that's good.
I just wasn't sure whether you were deliberately sharing that. Okay.
Cool. Okay. Great. So that's the quick intro to Zbay, and the general purpose behind this is to try to create an online space that's meaningfully controlled by internet users. And the way I've been thinking about that is that it's based in free software, and it relies for its backend not on a central server, but instead on a peer-to-peer network or potentially public infrastructure like light wallet nodes or DNS seeds or something like that. The background work that's happened so far is that we first built a usable but very clunky messaging app based on Zcash D. Then we switched from that to a light wallet app, or light wallet sort of infrastructure. We switched from building on Zcash D to building on Zcash Light CLI. Over the summer, I gave a talk at Hope, surveying different approaches to peer-to-peer messaging apps. That was helpful for me for getting a lay of the land. And this fall, with funding from the Zcash Foundation, and with prompting from Sarah Jamie Lewis, we got some great feedback on our grant proposal. she in particular prompted us to do a set of research on the needs of journalists and activists before kind of moving forward in trying to build out Zbay's features for that community, and it was really helpful. So we're concluding that project now, and the main takeaways or the preliminary results of that research, although I need to do more to distill it, are that well, we had some interesting findings that sort of validated some of our hunches, but also changed our direction. One finding was that secure drop is totally prohibitively expensive for journalists, for most journalists. That was something we went in suspecting. But another thing was that Tor level anonymity was not really that important for most journalists or activists, it's very important for some, but it was not a primary need for most of the people we spoke with. And that you end up seeing the biggest problems and failures end up happening through account compromise, where phishing is the leading cause, through device compromise. And so because of that, disappearing messages and deletion end up mattering a lot. We found generally that there's huge amounts of traction now for Signal, which we just see all around us, but that was validated by talking to people in different fields. And that even though many organizations use Signal, and they use Signal org-wide, they still use Slack or some insecure team space because it has features that Signal doesn't. And specifically channels and access control and the just general UX that Signal doesn't provide, but Slack does, of creating a space for your team. And so, yeah, the takeaways are that creating a usable Slack replacement could be a killer feature for us, or a killer niche for us. And that anonymity is interesting and helpful and adds to this space, but is less important than usability and yeah, specifically its usability as a Slack replacement. And that public channels are also really interesting and cool, but potentially less important than private spaces that are usable as a Slack replacement. And we have private channels now, but we don't have, like you would in Slack, Keybase, or Discord, a kind of private space, community server, whatever Slack calls it, that contains a set of channels. We also learned that disappearing messages and deletion are super important. And so all this adds up to feeling like we need some off-chain messaging approach. Yeah, so just in terms of like quickly, super in a nutshell, what does off-chain messaging require? There's private DMs, so one-on-one with people who are online. There's public communities where everyone can kind of see everything, and there's some notion or some ability of a user going on and offline, but still having the experience of being able to see what they missed, which is actually quite tricky. Then there's private communities, obviously, and there's some ability to both synchronize with others and have a notion of what you missed, but also have the ability to delete things. So and that's a bit of a tension.
That has to be off-chain.
Sorry?
That would need to be built off-chain.
Yes.
In order to delete things. And also having a messenger service on-chain is not really a great idea, as far as everything being stored on a ledger and always viewable.
Yeah, it's good for some things. It's good when you want that. It's good when you want a guarantee that your message is going to get delivered to the person you're sending it to. And that happens sometimes, but that is not the primary mode.
We're actually building something similar. It's called Parlay. It's called Rum Runner. I'm sorry. Parlay is another project. Rum Runner is more private, more focused on Tor, not keeping any messages like you're doing, which is what you're doing also is needed to for another Discord alternative type of thing. But we use something called Dex P2P. It was invented by JL777. It could do a non-send. It's completely off-chain. It's kind of what our new DEX with subatomic swaps will be working on. You can do a lot of things with it. It's really great. I suggest you take a look at it. It's called Dex P2P. It's on GitHub. It's made by JL777.
Awesome. Can you put a link in the chat or send a?
Yep.
Here, I'll paste my email in the chat as well.
Yeah.
I might not be able to access the chat from here. Now that I'm sharing. Here it is. Okay, yeah, and so yeah, we're doing something similar. So And just to move quickly, because I know we're super short on time. Let's see. For private DMs, we're using Tor and WebSockets. This is inspired by the project Ricochet and another project Kutch. But we use, instead of using those as libraries, we decided it was probably simpler and safer to send a message directly to another. Well, the basic idea is that each user starts their own hidden service. We're using v3 onion URLs, so the hidden service URLs are not guessable. And once you have someone's hidden service URL, you can make a WebSocket connection to them as if they were a website, and send messages as JSON on that WebSocket connection. So that's what we're using for DMs when people are online. For group chats and public communities, we've figured out that libp2p and Gossip Sub is a pretty good fit because it supports WebSockets, so those can be run over Tor as well. So you get the network layer privacy, but you also get an efficient system for distributing messages across many users. For retrieving messages that you missed while you're offline, we're looking at using Tor, and actually not WebSockets in this case, just a regular Tor web connection to a Git repo where every message, or at least the existence of the message and some hash of it, would become a file in a Git repo. And when users want to synchronize messages that they've missed, they make connections to a few peers and essentially fetch the repo.
Question.
Yes.
Have you heard of or looked at Secure Scuttlebutt?
I have. And
okay. Because it reminded me of.
Yeah, it deals with a lot of these things. And the funny thing about it is that there's a lot of things in SSB that are tilted towards the Twitter or sort of social networking use case where you're following someone, and not towards the Slack use case where you're in a room with other people. And so getting like the roominess into Secure Scuttlebutt is kind of inverting it, but we're definitely looking at things like Secure Scuttlebutt and Matrix for message ordering, because they do really cool, they do some clever things in terms of guaranteeing the integrity of a chain of messages so that you can't like fake timestamps and things like that. So we're looking at
message ordering is really important, and it's underappreciated because you can completely change the meaning of a conversation by reordering messages.
Yes, so that's something where we hope to learn from existing projects like SSB and Matrix, and Signal as well addresses that. So for private communities, the way we use cryptography to establish access control is still, I think, is going to be the hard part, and we're going to have to learn from existing projects and get a lot of feedback on it. But the network layer piece that we use to protect metadata, at least, I think we have a handle on, where we can create separate libp2p Gossip Sub networks over Tor and WebSockets for each community, so that they're really not touching. Once you're in like the ECC community, you're not sending messages in any way that even at the network layer touch nodes that are outside of that community. And then finally, for deletion, we're thinking about keeping message content and metadata in separate files, storing them the way we would a file like an image sent, and not keeping them in the Git or in the Git history, or the kind of definitive chain history. I'm just referring to them there. So in terms of what is live, the Tor and WebSockets approach is live and working in Zbay. It's a little bit flaky still, but you always have the fallback of sending a memo if you can't connect to the other user. But I think I can demo that now. The Gossip Sub for groups is something we're testing with a proof of concept, but it seems to be working. The Git thing we're working on right now, promising, we're not sure, but it seems straightforward. And then private communities is a whole can of worms that will take us a long time to get feedback on different proposals for how to do that, and get review of that. And then I think the disappearing messages, we have a pretty clear plan for. But so that's where we're at. I know we're out of time too, but I could send a quick, this would be the demo piece. I have someone on my team who's online. I'm not sure if he's still there.
I'm here.
Let's see, yeah, it looks like he's still online. So we're able to show some online status indicators now for other users, and we're able to chat. But oh, yep, there he is. So this is pretty fast and off chain. Are folks able to see the demo?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
The font is a little small, but
Got it. Okay, so I should.
I'm always the one who needs the font to be the biggest, I've
I
noticed.
wonder if do I have
recently.
any built? No, I don't have. It's in Electron, but we've disabled the growing and shrinking of fonts.
I can still make out the words if I squint.
Okay. Well, anyway, we're able to send messages comfortably back and forth, and it's not happening off chain. But if one of us were to go offline, I'm sorry, it's happening off chain. If one of us were to go offline, we can fall back to encrypted memos.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks so much for everybody for
Yeah, thank you,
Alright,
Holmes. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks for the update.
Cool, thank you.
Nice
Oh,
work.
and changing font size is important. Consider that a feature request.
Exactly. Yep, good one.
All right, thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
for attending, everyone. Yeah, this ran a bit long, and
was
I
fun
hope
listening.
to be. Yeah, I hope to be back in the swing of things in terms of the structure and organization next month. So thanks for showing up and joining the conversation.
Yep.
Nice.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Guys,
Mm.
if you guys want to talk to me more about Pirate, let me know.
Okay, thanks, Angela. Appreciate that.